Coming up, if the Brooklyn Nets are ready to move in a young direction, then Cam Thomas is already ready to be that star. How they need to improve around him so he can be successful going forward. We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here in the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marbich. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And Doug, to the delight of certainly a segment of the Brooklyn Nets fans, we're talking about why Cam Thomas is the player in Brooklyn who needs help around him so he can maximize his value.
Yeah, we could be trending that direction here. I mean, I know Cam's been sort of a divisive guy among the Nets faithful here for a couple of years now. Part of that probably has to do with his style. Part of that has to do with just how the Nets have handled him and like sort of being non-committal themselves to what he is as a player, which I think sometimes doesn't help players in the eyes of fans, right? It's like, well, if the team doesn't seem to fully believe in you, then how can we fully believe in you? And we'll pick apart your game too. But if you look back at his season last year, framed in certain kinds of contexts, which we'll go through here in a second, I mean, he was ranking right among them, like among the very best names in the game by things that are just standard NBA metrics. I'm like not diving too deep here, and you'll be pretty impressed with the list I'm about to give. But in general, like, would you agree with that? Like the Nets, like if the Nets had framed the Cam Thomas thing differently, like the league might have already framed it differently, but it's almost like their non-committal piece to him maybe has made like the wider acceptance slower than it probably should have been.
I agree that the wider acceptance of Cam Thomas as being maybe one of the should be talked about as, hey, on the verge of being one of the elite talents in certain categories. That probably is a slower moving train than it should be. Even though I also think I would have loved to have seen Cam Thomas play a lot more games and start a lot more games early in his career. I was thinking about how it's also okay to say, while the Nets have not done a great job developing players all the time, to sit here right now and say that a late first round pick, remember, that like just because he has shown it on the court now, it doesn't change when he was drafted. We felt like the Nets maybe got a bit of a steal at the time, but okay, he played in 67 games, played in 57 games, and then in his third year, as a player who is still just 22 years old, he emerged. Whether we agree that, they did everything they could to help him along the way, in year 3 at 22 now, going into his 4th year, he's here. So I want to give the Nets some wiggle room here and just say, hey, ultimately, he's still really young. He can still be your star. He can still be the player you build around going forward. We're going to talk about that. So maybe it doesn't matter that you could have seen more of him sooner. I don't know if he would have taken a seismically larger leap forward by going into year 4 than year 3, say. Is that somewhat reasonable sense there?
Oh, yeah. And I wasn't even pushing back against like that it was all wrong necessarily. It does seem crazy to look back on it and be like, he didn't even start 15 games last year. All right.
Of course. Like that, I know that's the weird part. The rookie year, you're okay with. It's year 2 where you go, not even like a dozen starts. So for sure, right?
Yeah, like so 66 games, 51 starts. I'm not even pushing back on like how they handled it. I'm mostly pushing back on how it was handled is what has framed the discussion weirdly around him. That's all.
Sure.
Like that there was that because there seemed to be like a push and pull around like what he was as a player and how committed they were to actually playing him. Mm-hmm. It made it very difficult to come to any firm conclusions, or at the minimum, it just made him more of a polarizing player. Because it was like, if you started every game and you lived with some of the downside, I actually think the conversation would have been very different around him. Now, it's that it wasn't like that. And then there was just like that left an opening for if you weren't so into like what he was bringing on the court, the opening was like easily there for you to walk through because the team was doing it themselves. That's all. Like it was the team was signaling it themselves. So if you weren't into it, it was like, well, how wrong could I be? The team doesn't even want to play him.
And then this seismic shift, right? To your point, averaging over 16 minutes a year ago to over 31 minutes, to 11 points a game to 22 and a half points a game, right? Like all these things, all of a sudden, it's like this explosion from year 2 to year 3 from we don't know. Maybe the Nets don't know. Maybe the league doesn't know too. Oh my goodness. Maybe we all should have known. And that speaks to the larger NBA narrative, right?
And by the end of it, like it was all off. Like he was given full reign to like take as many shots as he wants. So I don't think by the end or even by the middle of the season, I think that was kind of over.
Yes.
Like he was given all the leash in the world to just shoot as many times as he want. Like he had a really high usage percentage. It was 18 shots a game. Like, so the debate around whether or not they were willing to like turn over a lot of shot creating possibilities to him, like that is no longer in this
too. Yeah.
The year there was no longer a discussion about it. They did offer him enormous latitude on how much he was able to shoot when he was in the game. It was just mostly like the framing of it leading up to that. Like it took a long time. And for some people, it took way too long. And for some people, it probably was the right amount of time. I think that's all it. But I have, I don't know, is that like a good way to encapsulate sort of like where we stand with Cam now? Because I have a pretty interesting group to put him in here.
Oh, of course. Yeah. It was, let Cam cook from day one. There was that segment. You go, well, okay, he's a rookie. Let's let him have him develop a little bit here. And then once you cross that threshold, you feel like, okay. And now here we are. And the real question becomes, how is the organization, does the organization see it as well, right? Did the free reign they gave him, does that all add up here? And now when you put him in the group of players Doug's going to give you go, okay, probably exactly where he should be. And maybe the ascending talent that the Nets need if they want to be successful in this pseudo rebuild that we keep describing.
All right, so this list is crazy, right? If you look at it this way, because this actually factors in that there are like players on bad teams that are allowed to, take shots and do stuff as well. So if you just sort by points per minute, right? And points per minute kind of the reason I'm taking away from points per game is because like those games that he wasn't accounting for the games that like he didn't start and play limited minutes. And so that's where like the points per game. So if you boil it down to points per minute, like just points per minute scored while on the court this year, I did just section us off like he had to have played more than 60 games just to reduce some of these other guys that were in there. Although that does take off guys like it really only took off like LaMelo and Joel Embiid and maybe Donovan Mitchell too. So anyway, when you look at it that way, Cam, this is nuts. Cam sits 15th overall in points per minute this past season. Here's the list of the guys that are above him, right? That played the requisite amount of games. Luka, SGA, Giannis, Brunson, Steph, Jokic, Booker, Tatum, Anthony Edwards, De'Aaron Fox, KD, Durant, LeBron, Zion Williamson, Victor Wembanyama, Cam Thomas. 11 of those 14 guys, 11 of the 14 guys above him are all NBA. Like that was basically the whole all NBA team. Right? There's 15 total guys on all NBA. Wemby is going to be on all NBA almost for sure next year if he plays the right amount of games. Zion probably had an outside chance to make it, and then you get De'Aaron Fox, and there's probably some people. I mean, if the Kings were a little better, the guard position was just super deep this year with guys like Brunson, like making an ascension, and like SGA and guys like this. Overall, though, I mean, those are the stars. Those are the stars in the league, and yeah, you want to say, okay, well, points per minute. Given a long leash, lots of guys could do that. They can't. Like it's just, or they can, or like it's just not going to be set up for them to do it. And so I know like the picking apart probably narrative around it could be like, I know what like the other side of this could be. I filtered by the most important thing in the game, which is scoring points.
Yeah.
And just gave you the list of who does it on a per minute basis. And the list is overwhelmingly the stars in the league. Yeah. And I just know most people wouldn't put Cam anywhere close to the rest of this group if you were like start to slice and dice it different ways.
No, I'm sure if we start talking, the top 100 list and we do all those things, right? When will Cam Thomas start to sniff that type of conversation when he's specifically really great, at least right now, in this one category? I suppose we'll continue talking about what it means for this team going forward and how they're going to maybe construct the roster if they want to keep Cam Thomas and his talent in mind. Inside of that list, though, that top 15, I think you would say outside of Wemby, everybody else playoff team. I think every one of those other players is on a playoff team. Might be the case outside of the Spurs, possibly. Maybe, and the Pelicans play in but not play
Yeah,
off.
yeah, the
Is that
Pelicans.
right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, they were. Yeah, well, he was hurt, but they made
Yeah.
the playoffs. Yeah, every team. Oh no, Steph.
Oh,
The Warriors
Warriors.
didn't make
There you go.
the
Right.
Warriors
And
didn't make
and,
the
and I
playoffs.
guess like Steph has enough in his bank,
Oh,
bank
whatever.
account.
Yeah,
So
it's like Steph.
right. But
It's
point
like
being, it's like
okay,
the caveat some would that the next category that we'll discuss here in a moment is okay, so he did do this production level, which nobody can just do, even on bad teams, but the team wasn't good. So is it a product of Cam Thomas shoots more and the team doesn't do well? No, that's not the case. Let's explain why they need to improve the team around him so the top 15 scoring per minute value actually translates to wins for this roster. Cam Thomas is doing his part. Who needs to step up and how can Brooklyn help him? We'll talk about that in just one moment.
all right, it's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL as well. FanDuel is giving you a shot to win big on your own. Right now, new customers over at FanDuel are going to get $150 in bonus bets. Any winning $5 bet, it's $150. You bet on spreads, you bet on money lines, you bet on player props. It's so much more. You can slice and dice these player props every which way. It's crazy how many ways you can get it on FanDuel, and it's all there for you. You just got to visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. You're going to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we roll along today on the Locked On Nets episode, talking about, of course, one Cam Thomas and the idea that he, in fact, is maybe the budding offensive superstar talent that the Nets need to have here. Do you agree there? I dovetail at the end of segment number one saying there's no need to debate whether or not Cam Thomas is doing his part or whether or not Cam Thomas being productive, 18 shots a game this past season, should be looked at as yes, but the team can't be successful if he is given that volume of shooting. I think we look everywhere else now on this roster, including Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson and all the other players that maybe didn't live up to expectations this past season. Cam Thomas did his job, and this is the first time he was given the chance to. He came through massively. Now you need to say, what does he need so that these games and these performances don't go by the wayside, which, by the way, happened a lot this past year. Great games from Cam, not great games from the team overall.
This is where it gets harder because this is where the anti-Cam group will come in and be like, well, it's empty calories. It's, points and losses. He scores more, the team loses. These are like, I would call them like quasi ridiculous debates because one, I would think the efficiency was like mostly fine. He gets to the line a lot too, which really helps the true shooting climb up there. The problem with evaluating it now is that the Nets, it's like you can't evaluate it because everyone else sucked. And so when
you needed the season where everybody played well, and then what was Cam Thomas's value relative to
the way other teams were cued in, so there's a couple things, right? So one is he's the only guy that ever saw a double on the whole season from another team. Like no one else even the other teams didn't even consider doubling anybody else on this team ever. Now they didn't do it to Cam, they didn't blitz and trap him exclusively. But, I mean, I think starting with that Atlanta Hawks game was the first time we really saw it, and it really threw him off. More as the season went on, we saw teams really dig in on him and try to stop him at the point of attack because they were like, well, he's the only guy that can do anything. Bridges never saw a double, and forget it after that. No one ever saw any double, and no one ever saw any double teams. So, just from that standpoint, other teams signaled, okay, well, this is something we do have to sort of handle this a little bit. If we handle this, if we handle our business with him, it might be kind of a total wrap with the rest of the team. So that's the one thing. The other thing too is it is hard to evaluate the wins and losses because legit nobody else could score. They couldn't. No one on this team could score. And when no one else can score, then you are just how can you really evaluate it? And that's the time where it's I really kind of take it out of you can't put the blame on him for not winning the games when he scores, when no one else does anything. Bridges had a massive regression off the second half of the last year. Yeah. And that was it. That was the whole story. Dinwiddie never shot. Schroeder was fine when he came over. They don't even have another guy who can dribble after those guys. And so, how can we ever possibly really evaluate the winning piece of this when honestly everyone else is way underperforming whatever a real basketball team would do?
No, and you would never do I don't know, name any other sport, name any other position, or stay inside the NBA, name any other team when player X is performing at a high level and the supporting cast is not meeting expectations. You never look at the guy that's doing it. You always look at everybody else. And I think, we've talked about this on the last episode around teams pursuing free agents and liking veterans over young players because you know what the veteran is. I think for a lot of it can be looking at Cam Thomas and saying, well, we don't really know what he is, fully. What's he going to be? We talk about Cam Thomas 3-4 years from now. What is the discussion going to look like? Is he going on the track of being a player that starts to facilitate a little bit more, can at least be a road bump on defense, and then just becomes an elite scorer, becomes a 22, 23, 25 point a night guy with consistency and helps his team win games? So 4 years from now, we may look back and talk about how for the first 5-6 years of Cam Thomas's career, he was one of those dudes that could score the basketball and never had the supporting cast. And people are always hesitant, I think, to give that, right? You need another year and another year. And there's something that's at least not, there's something justifiable about that. This is year one that Cam Thomas really was given the opportunity and showed he's capable of doing it. If you look at this team now, then, though, and you're the Brooklyn Nets, whether it's about taking a little bit of a longer view or not, he's coming up on a big, could extend him opportunity. Do you think the Brooklyn Nets want or feel compelled to make an adjustment to this roster to better understand what Cam Thomas's true franchise value is?
Yeah, that's tough. They clearly do. I mean, the team is not optimized around his skill set at all. Now, whether or not he's the kind of guy,
the team in general, who could be the other way.
Yeah. Like whether you, because okay, so the problem with Cam is that he is, essentially a shooting guard, probably by definition, and therefore needs to work with probably a primary ball handler, but he's also undersized, so that's going to cause you issues. But I mean, this is where the Simmons thing was always the dream here. Is hey, Simmons actually would pair really well here as sort of a primary on ball guy, and then working into an offense that had Cam around. Plus, you could make up for a lot of the defensive stuff. Simmons actually was a clear match. They need some kind of connector. I've thrown out Josh Giddey as a guy. I know no one wants to hear because he was a disaster in the playoffs, but guys like this who don't need the ball a ton, can act as connectors, right? Can actually facilitate some stuff getting into actions where you can just get the other guy into the play because you don't want to take a ton of shots. Guys like that actually would really benefit, I think, Cam, but the Nets aren't built to kind of bring guys like this in. So we could be looking at another season of clunky pain around his skill set compared to what everyone else has, because Schroeder, he's okay. But because if you look at this list of guys, the one other problem too is if you look at that list of guys that I just gave above Cam, I mean, his assist rate is by far the lowest of that group. It's not even close. And that's where you get the drop off of sort of whole game, holistic game effectiveness into just scoring. Because it's funny, the guy that's right below him on this list that probably is a little like him is Colin Sexton. Right. And it's funny that they live in the same range because it's decent scoring, low assists. And that is a thing that clearly has to improve. So you could either say the Nets improve around him and they add more guys that they maybe fit his style, or stylistically he has to change in order to ball distribute more and just become more of a well-rounded offensive player like that beyond just the scoring. So I don't know. It's a little chicken or egg, but that's a problem the Nets kind of do face with his skill set.
Coming up, the players to fit around Cam or Cam's adjustments to fit around players. We'll talk about that and the young core that he can develop with this next season coming up in just one moment. All right, so as we round out the Locked On Nets episode, always remind you, get us on X at Doug Norrie, at Adam Arbrecht, and of course, YouTube podcast. We appreciate it. Our journey continues, even if the Brooklyn Nets give up, usually when the season ends, 82 games. That's not our job. Now, you mentioned that last thing there. Before we talk about the young guys, Noah Clowney, I think, being key among them. We kind of talked about at the end of the season, him and Nicholas Claxton, and that's what starts to reframe what you maybe make choices around his free agency and bringing him back. It's the same thing, I think, when you look at Cam Thomas and saying, well, who are the young players here? Are we going to, as we've discussed, trade Dorian Finney-Smith, get a 2024 first-round draft pick potentially? And do we look at guys that either, because the Josh Giddey thing I want to get back to, but players that either put Cam Thomas more into the number two, pure shooter, pure scorer, and someone takes away the table-setting responsibilities? Or do you go through a growing pain season and say, if we want you to be the core, one of the core centerpieces of this franchise, then it's going to be another rough year. where we're going to have to do a lot of work as an organization saying there were probably more assists out there for you, but we know the talent and the complementary pieces aren't fully in place yet. Because I think we'll start having that discussion too. How many assists are left on the table because it just isn't the right set of pieces for Cam Thomas to drive and kick, for Cam Thomas to have those open looks created off of double teams and some of the pressure defenses will put on him.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, if you look at his assist rate, it's basically in line per minute with his whole career, except that if you looked at the assist rate over the course of the season, it climbed month by month and
That was
then
a
kind
big
of
one for
dipped
you
and
and
then
me.
kind of dipped at the end, like kind of
Yeah.
fell back to earth at the end. Also, too, again, we mentioned no one on this team could hit any shots, so that's going to affect your assist rate.
Not gonna
I
help.
think the eye test for us, or at least for me, I think we both said it at different points of the season. The eye test definitely gave you the sense that he was making more read and react plays.
Yeah.
And one, he started dealing with the trap quicker, and because that was a real rough stint for him at the beginning. But as soon as he started to recognize the trap quicker and the blitz quicker, he was able to get out of that in better ways. So that was a good thing. I think there's plenty of times, and I'm just saying this from memory, there's plenty of times over the course of the year when we're kind of talking about games, like tweeting about games, that I was very high on some of the decision making he was making in terms of like getting into the paint, kicking, driving kick, and stuff like that. So I want to believe that part is there, that some of those assist numbers were driven down just by everyone not really kind of holding up their end of the bargain. He also isn't really all the way there yet. He's not like running pick and roll. He's not running like rim running lob threat stuff. Like, he's not like, do we see like him and Claxton 2-man game at all? Not really. Right. And so that is the stuff that doesn't pass the eye test because he really wasn't doing it that often. Now, Jordy Fernandez comes in. Maybe they want to run some new sets like this, and that's like what they work to. I think we'll see kind of early on if there's a push toward that kind of thing. But really, we'd have to see at least some pick and roll from him.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm just not sure like that was something that we really saw. And the Nets admittedly didn't seem to run much of a system all season long.
The Nets didn't really have anything happening. And it's, you mentioned Claxton, obviously free agency, pending that he would return. But it is funny because a player like him, as you say, well, it's not like Cam Thomas is really getting into those sets to do the thing that Claxton is capable of doing. The hard part is Claxton doesn't do other things, right? So in my mind, when you talk about Josh Giddey earlier, it's hey, listen, would the Nets take a flyer on that? Under $9 million cap hit, I'd be interested. I would take a flyer for a year to see if that could pan out a little bit. I would also, we mentioned the other day about the Jazz talking about what they're looking at this offseason and maybe wanting to move Collins. I bring up the idea of like a model of his type of ilk where it's like, if I drive and want to dump off to a player that has some drive ability at the basket of his own accord, that's like the other issue here. Mikal Bridges, we say this all the time. Mikal Bridges isn't getting through anybody or around anybody, right? No. Cam Johnson, that's not really in his bag. Dorian Finney-Smith, go down the list of this roster. So, and this isn't to make all the excuses in the world about why Cam Thomas's numbers could have been so much better. You said it. He still has development to make here. He's 22 years old. But I can point to those players and then go, right, I could probably point out 3 plays a game minimum where when he was penetrating in the paint, if you have not a Nick Claxton, but a player X, if you have not a Mikal Bridges, but a player Y, those little dump-off passes and the opportunities off of that are even more successful than just saying the driving kicks and finding open shooters that can't knock down shots. So that part of it is really interesting to me to think about going forward here, and ultimately maybe to think about Noah Clowney. That becomes really fascinating now. How does Noah Clowney, a player that is the next step or evolution of what we thought Nicholas Claxton could become offensively, but clearly is never going to be. That could make a big difference for Cam Thomas this year.
Yeah, look, and like those guys, like the guys that we're talking about, like adding that would like maybe just elevate his game a little bit. Like, it's not like these guys are just all over the place and like the Nets just are doing a bad job not finding them.
Nobody else is in the market, just us taking what we need here, making it all work.
It's mostly like these like sort of like guys who can do enough on their own, can distribute and a little bit and like and be able to like sort of figure things out. Maybe like people will say, okay, maybe Trent Watford can be this guy, right?
Yeah,
like this guy, like just like a little sort of secondary point guardish kind of stuff, can do enough to stay on the court, has like decent court vision, right? And can get to the basket if he needs to, like in sort of like grenade situations near the end of the clock, like stuff like this. Or like you play with just like a big who is just really good at like high screen pick and pop, kind of like, Şengün or something like that. Like guys like this would really unlock Cam a lot. But I mean, these guys, it's just like these guys don't grow on trees. So I don't have a lot. I mean, the Watford thing's interesting to me, but it's not like there's 500 of these guys out there and Sean Marks has a blind spot. It's just that right. they just aren't really that prevalent. And so, because notice that I'm not even talking about playing with like pure point guard guys like Jalen Brunson, guys that, even Shea, guys like this, like, some of the reason why, like the Giddey thing wasn't working at the end, right? It's like maybe he's just like a little out of place for that team. And so this is all to say there's a different kind of guy that would work here with Cam that the Nets just don't really have right now. And like, man, look, Simmons comes back healthy. Like maybe that's the guy, but I just don't have any hope that that's going to happen.
Slip it in there. You got to slip in the name at least once.
No, he's still on the team. He's still on the team. I don't know. Supposed to workout video, so we know he's going to come back 100%. But like,
phase one of the offseason is complete. The workouts are being posted.
That's I mean, like you can set your clock. You can set your clock to the workout videos. Or the workout posts. But yeah, anyway, he would be the guy, but I don't have any faith he's going to actually be back.
There's something in there around like Groundhog's Day when it comes to Ben Simmons workout videos in the offseason. It's just, sign of 6 more months of losing basketball for the Brooklyn Nets. Ultimately, my final thought on it is when we think about this upcoming season and kind of our philosophy about what the organization should do. Well, you mentioned Watford. I was high on him coming into the year. Then I cooled off a little bit because I wasn't seeing a lot of them, and that kind of picked up again. The nice way to think about it, if you reclaim some draft capital or whatever, and you think about 2025 is, yeah, great. Take this year, Clowney, Watford, Cam Thomas, and, Jalen Wilson coming off the bench, but he's a less that athleticism and the requisite skills you want to complement Cam. That doesn't really factor in. But okay, develop with these guys. And if we get another young player, develop. That means probably losing basketball, but probably also building on something that you think you can carry forward. The other way of doing it, looking at free agents or looking at possible trades, is again where we run this risk of bringing guys that give you that sample size with Cam, but then also, let's not get crazy here. We don't want to accidentally start winning too many basketball games. So the agenda serving here for the organization may, as much as anything, have impacted how Cam Thomas has been developed and how they perceive him going forward. An episode for a later date, not to run long. Maybe other teams look at Cam Thomas and the Brooklyn Nets and go, well, yeah, in Brooklyn, obviously he's going to struggle. Look at the rest of the roster. But if we bring him to us with our pure point guard, all of a sudden he has a real value. So there's certainly a level of intrigue here about the Nets' plans and what Cam Thomas is relative to the NBA.
No truer words spoken. Okay, we're going to get out of here.
I knew it.
As always, we say, the Nets didn't hold up their end of the bargain.
That's right.
But we are 5 days a week, all through the playoffs, all through the draft, talking Cam Thomas, talking Bridges, talking what the offseason plans could be, might be, should be. It's all going to be there. You got to make sure you're subscribed over at Locked On Nets on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to the podcast.
We are the music makers. We are the dreamers of dreams. Why, that is Bill Wonka.
Oh, Billy, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.